Welcome to Vault 33, a podcast for Amazon Prime's Fallout. We're your hosts, Andrew Sorsini,
Dwayne D,
and Tosin Anafawakin.
We just watched the first episode of Fallout titled The End. We assume you have as well. Total spoilers ahead. So let's dive into the aftertalk. Before we do, remember to follow us at Twitter at Fallout Vault 33. Add us on iTunes, Spotify, and other streaming services. Like us. Please leave us a review. That's how we get noticed. But the best thing you can do really is spread the word. Tell your friends. Okay, this episode was written by Geneva Robertson-Dworet and Graham Wagner, who happen to be the showrunners of the show, and directed by Jonathan Nolan, who happens to be one of the executive producers. Dwayne, why don't you kick us off with a recap of what happened in this episode?
I will, but I do want to ask you a quick question.
Yeah.
All right. So Robertson, Dworet, and Wagner, I don't know how to pronounce his name. They're the showrunners.
Yeah.
Nolan is an executive producer. How does this role differ from the role he had on Westworld?
Well, in Westworld, he was also the executive producer, but he was the showrunner. He was the creator of the show. And in this case, Geneva Robertson-Dworet and Graham Wagner brought the show to Kilter Films, and then Kilter Films shepherded the show through Amazon Prime.
So he's kind of a chairman of the board as opposed to the daily.
Yeah, but
CEO guy.
Also like a chairman emeritus. Like if you want to have a show like kick off with prestige, you definitely want the guy who did it for Westworld on HBO behind you.
Right, but it wasn't like he was working on it while he was working on Westworld or anything.
No.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that makes sense. Jonathan Nolan's name is there, so you kind of have to ask these questions.
Absolutely.
But let's get into the recap. Okay, so this episode 1, The End, is broken up into these labeled sections. It's also the first episode, so there's a lot of setting of the scene, which is going to make this recap a little longer than most. But don't worry, I'm going to go through it quickly, and then we can get into all the details and other cool stuff we saw. All right, so the first section is labeled The Beginning, and we're introduced to a futuristic mid-20th century Los Angeles. There's an actor named Cooper Howard who's playing at a birthday party in an upper middle class or upper class home in the hills outside of the big city. He sits on his horse wearing the trappings of a 1950s or 60s Western genre cowboy hero, and he's performing lasso tricks amid all these children with their hair perfectly combed, staring in amazement at the performer, while the mothers in their beautiful paisley dresses and high heels dart around the house preparing the cake. But this isn't our mid-century, though. The party attendees are multiracial at a time when our world was segregated. The technology is something out of a comic book at the time. Period-accurate aesthetics, but far beyond what was available in at least in our timeline. So there's a robotic helper bot that could be out of the cartoon The Jetsons or maybe Lost in Space because Robbie the Robot vibes. We've also got perfectly pristine television pictures being delivered, and we see images of a reporter or a pundit on the news talking about the U.S. president's negotiations to avert mutually assured destruction via nuclear war. So it wasn't quite our world. As Cooper prepares to leave, once his performance is concluded, the city below erupts in a series of mushroom clouds. He gets on his horse with his daughter who's with him, and he rides away as the party attendees scatter. Now, the next section is labeled 219 years later. It's also labeled Lucy. So let's give you the lowdown on her. So we meet a young and vivacious Lucy McLean, a self-described active contributor to the well-being of her community, which in this case is Vault 33. Vault 33 is a built and engineered, locked and self-sustaining underground community of the descendants of those wealthy people who had prepared for the Cold War to end in a hot apocalypse. Its denizens are educated, intelligent, well-fed, but not so well-bred. In fact, when we first meet Lucy, she's aware that their Vault 33 is becoming inbred. Lucy explains to the Vault 33 Council that she's ready to marry, sight unseen, a male from the adjacent Vault 32. So she can both have sex and have children with someone who isn't one of her cousins. Lucy's the daughter of the leader of Vault 33, the Overseer. And she's a high-achieving adult who's come of age well versed in many of the skills-based disciplines the Vault 33 Society engages in to keep the place running. She fixes pipes. She's learned useful science skills. She's learned fencing skills, gymnastics skills, self-defense skills, which she calls phys ed, and riflery, in addition to her speech skills. She also has a passion for teaching the children of Vault 33 American history with a focus on ethics. She's close with her father, the Vault leader, and it seems that she and her brother are his world. We then meet Maximus, a young initiate to a group called the Brotherhood of Steel. These are surface dwellers living in a society run by clerics who task armored warriors called knights to travel the world and perform missions for them. The missions seem designed to hasten the end of the fractured post-apocalyptic society, and they seem to hope to one day lead the people of the surface wasteland into a more ordered and less chaotic world. That, and they want to find pre-apocalyptic tech. Maximus hopes one day to become a squire and then a knight. His peers haze him with beatings, but he does have one friend, Dane, who's actually chosen to be a knight squire. When Dane's injured, Maximus is chosen to replace her as a squire in her place on her knight's mission. Their task is to find a runaway scientist. Meanwhile, Lucy gets approval to get married to someone in Vault 32 as part of their triennial trade. So they trade, I guess, every 3 years. But during the wedding ceremony, Vault 33 and the audience, the viewers, learn that the residents of Vault 32 who should be attending the wedding had actually been slaughtered by raiders from the polluted surface world. The raiders pose as Vault 32 residents, and Lucy even gets married to and consummates her wedding vows with a surface dweller named Monty, who's pretending to be a Vault 32 resident. But as they finish their intercourse, the surface dwelling raiders turn on the Vault 33ers. They catch them by surprise and attempt to wipe them out. A battle ensues in Vault 33, wherein Lucy and her father have to kill her new husband, and the Vault 33ers manage to maintain their hold on the vault despite the attack, but at great cost. Lucy's father is kidnapped by the escaping raiders, but the vault is saved. Lucy plots with her cousin and her brother to escape Vault 33 by herself so that she can look for her father, rescue him, and bring him back. As Maximus and Lucy head out separately into the surface wasteland on their different missions, we meet a ragtag trio of bounty hunters looking for the same scientist that Maximus and his knight, Titus, are looking for. The bounty hunters, they revive a ghoul, which is a mutated, necrotic post-human, or a person who's somehow been preserved after death. These ghouls are revived for certain tasks and then put kind of back on ice when they're no longer needed. In this case, the ghoul is the remnants of our old friend Cooper Howard, the cowboy from the mid-20th century. He accepts the bounty, but he kills the bounty hunters. And now we have 3 characters to follow on their adventures in the wasteland. And that is the recap. Now on to the analysis.
Wonderfully done. Applause.
It's just, you're inundated with so much visual information.
Yeah.
You know, like,
yeah.
It's just wild. Like, with Westworld, you can be like, oh, you're in the Wild West with the robots. But here, it's so inventive and it's so vibrant that I just kind of it took a while to just kind of figure out how to explain it.
Also, any pilot has this awesome task of trying to front load so much story points, so much world building. So this is just a really well written pilot in my opinion.
Yeah, I haven't seen many pilots that are this well developed, to be honest. I was impressed. And I'm kind of a critic, so
yes, you are. So before we get into talking about this episode, I have to give a global note about our particular approach on this podcast. So typically, with other recap podcasts that we have produced, those shows have come out on a week-to-week basis. So all episodes are currently available on Amazon Prime right now, but we'll only be discussing what we've learned in this particular episode and in episodes prior to this one moving forward. We're not going to discuss plot points ahead of this episode, or if we do, it'll be purely from our speculation, not from having watched ahead. So
we're focused on episode 1 right now, and the next time we drop an episode, it's going to be focused on episode 2, knowing what happened in episode 1. and so on. So
Yeah.
if you're watching the show and you want some like analysis afterward, you can watch it and listen, and then watch it and listen, and we'll be here.
And not be afraid to be spoiled of future episodes.
We will not spoil you. That's in fact why we give the recap in part, so you know what we're going to be talking about.
So before we drill down into like the salient points about this episode, I just want to globally ask each of you, what did you think of this episode? Dwayne, what did you think of the episode overall? Like just your general overall view.
I mean, I hate to say it, but I was blown away. I mean, I'm so mad that I have to say that.
Why are you mad that you have to say that?
Because it's like you open it up, you crack open a pilot of a new show, and the show, you saw the trailers, you saw, whatever other sneak peek stuff they dropped, and you're like, okay, how's this all going to come together? What are the hiccups? So pilot usually sets stuff up, and then the rest of the show has to fix what's going on. But it almost feels as if they really kind of put together a gigantic, 8-episode film, and they knew where their section breaks were, almost like it's almost like a book. Like, Fallout's a game, and games have pieces and chapters and sections, but it just really feels like this was so well put together. Like the editing room, wow, because I wasn't lost at all. Despite getting pushed all this information, and the stuff in the movie and the show is not exactly what's going on in the game. They've invented characters, even though the factions are the same. So I was really blown away by how cohesive it was. I felt as if someone who's more of like a geek muggle, like my wife, were watching it. She could follow everything with no problem. And the setup in the 20th century with the nuclear war apocalypse stuff was just so succinct, but so clear, and it was great. It was great. Tosin, what are you thinking?
I thought it was pretty good. I wouldn't go to the same extent that you are. I was not blown away per se. I thought there was a lot of solid elements, and for someone who's loosely familiar with the world and hasn't played the games, as I noted in the previous episode. It was good it was interesting to watch them set the table and try and understand the various pieces that will be played with this season. But I wouldn't say I was necessarily blown away. I mean, I think I've seen a lot of incredible TV over the past couple years, and this fits in there. It's solid, so we'll see where it goes.
Okay, but I guess I'm judging it in part because it's a video game adaptation.
Sure.
And that's my thing. Like I've rarely seen a video game adaptation that's any good. I was blown away by how tight
and I
this
were
was.
chatting a bit about this, and where I challenge that a little bit is because most of the video game adaptations that we've seen have been movies and not necessarily given the room to breathe as a TV series.
Totally,
and
I agree, yeah.
There are much less of them that exist, and we're kind of in that heyday in terms of people seeing value in TV, both from a studio perspective, cast and crew, as well as the stories that are being told there. So I think it fits in, and honestly, I think from our recollection, we only saw like a handful of stuff, and most of it was animated. And you on the animated side, you
Arcane.
had Arcane, League of Legends, which was incredible, very well made. And
on the animated side, I feel like the thing about it is that when you're playing a video game, it's larger than life because it is computer animated. So when you get to animation, you can kind of maintain that. It's when you move. Like eyes can get gigantic when something happens.
Sure.
Explosions can be different. You can stretch someone's body if you need to. When you take the video game to live action, and I say this with the caveat that I don't know that live action is always the best medium for storytelling, or I don't really understand why it's considered the most prestigious, because animation is awesome. But when you bring it to live action, you have to tamper certain things down in order to make them believable. And Fallout is kind of like goofy game with goofy animations.
For sure.
And
for sure.
they totally managed to make me feel like I was in that goofy animated space when I was in Vault 33, but it wasn't animated. And that's where I felt that I was impressed. You know, whereas The Last of Us has lots of muted colors in the game, lots of browns.
Right.
You know, it's a stained world.
But a very grounded, realistic world, The Last of Us.
Right. It's like, you know, how Nolan took the Batman from Adam West to The Dark Knight, right? When you look at Fallout, it is big and it is bright and it is juicy. And they managed to maintain that big, bright, and juicy with it, while making it, I don't want to call it like prestige television yet because I haven't seen it all.
Sure.
But you know, grounded enough for it to take hold. So I don't know, that's where I'm impressed. That's where I'm blown away. I'm blown away by how Fallout-y it feels, having played the game.
Sure.
And yet how realistic it feels. So, you know, we'll see.
I think my short assessment is, you know, it's for live action video game adaptations. We've got a pretty low bar. Like there's this and The Last of Us, and beyond that, there's like Twisted Metal on Peacock and Halo on Paramount.
Ugh, Halo.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, but I do think, Tosin, you're totally right when it comes to television as a medium for storytelling that's been getting a prestige in the last 10 years that it didn't get before. And frankly, in a world where, you know, we're in 2024, back in 2020 and 2021, you know, a movie would be out for a day before it showed up on streaming. And you got used to seeing these movies on small screens. So this like high production value on your, you know, house television, or maybe even on like maybe your big computer, whatever. And so the idea that you could actually design a story for the small screen that has the time and energy and breadth that you can express on TV, like how we did with Game of Thrones or Band of Brothers, these books, take a video game to that and tell it seriously and take your time doing it. That's all great stuff. I'm looking forward to that stuff. I think that's where TV totally works. If you're going to adapt something to a movie, I'm a big fan of adapting a short story because you only have so long in a movie, so much tension. And I'll carve out a caveat for Dune. But yeah, I was impressed. Anyway.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about some of the salient points about this episode. I wanted to start off with the setting in the prologue, which I'm really sort of curious about. Like I've played Fallout New Vegas and Fallout 4, which is the latest iteration. And I've only played though a little bit of both of those. So I'm very enamored of the world building and the setting, but I don't really know a heck of a lot about the lore, admittedly. And so it's interesting to have this mid-century setting, but an alternate one where technology has advanced. And it makes me think maybe we were never technologically held back by World War II in this era. And we just continued to develop technologically, but somehow stayed at the same design aesthetic through the 50s when the bombs hit. Maybe we've been at détente all this time up until the bombs hit. So I have no idea.
Which is funny because the bombs showed up as a result of World War II.
Right.
So it's definitely like a weird piece of the universe. But I definitely, I don't know. I really enjoyed seeing that. They didn't show the robot in her kitchen moving, but you knew exactly what it was.
Yes.
And you didn't know exactly what it did, but you're like, oh, it's like that's her helpery robot-y thing, whatever.
Right.
And then also, like, you know, we're in 2024, so the production values can be so tight, and you've got like crystal clear, like it's all idealized. It's an idealized late 50s, early 60s kind of space, right? And that's not gritty. It's not like those shoes look uncomfortable. You know, it's like they have every creature comfort you could think of, and you're sold on that being a good time to live in.
One thing that I found really interesting about the intro, comparing it to other video games, is it really had this sort of Last of Us vibe to me, at least how The Last of Us started, where you have the TV/radio commentary about this changing world and about the potential for groundbreaking elements. And then you also have this father and daughter dynamic as they are both navigating the world that they live in, and also trying to navigate an escape from that world from the changes of the world that they live in. And so that in itself, I thought was very artistic, especially some of the shots that they tried to do, the reflections in the glass before the glass shatters, right? Showing this whole house become pieces of itself, and their world also quote unquote shattering, and then this cross between all this sort of new age technology that you noted here with robots and TVs, and while it is in that 50s style, you still have cars versus an earth-shattering element, and the one thing that you see that's trying to make this glorious escape is horse.
A
right?
horse.
It's back to the old days.
Back to basics.
Yeah, which is quite interesting because I feel like there's probably a motion where we go back to basics, and then there's and then there's where we end off in the story where you're in a vault with technology and a lot of the sameness, which I also found like really kind of interesting with that sort of Fallout logo that they showed, where it's initially on flames and then it self-heals, and that's kind of the story that we are hearing about, this recovery after the storm, and hearing about what else develops from there.
Did you notice in that prologue a couple things? You get all this discussion about the thumbs up gesture, about a way to gauge the atomic blast, and that we see that thumbs up like as a motif throughout the entire episode. And
that's right. He can't do the thumbs up in the beginning because apparently it's tied to communism, which seems to be the last taboo.
Yes. Here it is associated with something dark. And then when we, 219 years later, once the apocalypse has happened, that thumbs up is associated with like this artificial optimism.
Yeah, totally. I also thought it was interesting because Tosin's talking about the beginning and how it had similarities to The Last of Us. One of the similarities between Fallout and The Last of Us is that they're both post-apocalyptic spaces. Because of that, they're going to share some elements. I'd be interested if eventually BioShock showed up as a television series, if their intro would have some of these same elements, and maybe even more, because BioShock came first and then Fallout came, but Fallout borrows a significant amount from BioShock's idea of post-apocalyptic preparedness.
Yes.
So that's also interesting.
That would be such a dream for me to see BioShock adapted.
And armored suits and all that stuff. So
that's right.
So yeah, Tosin, that's a really good point.
Did you notice that Cooper's cowboy suit colors in its bright blue and yellowish gold echo the overalls of the Vault-Tec, the Vaulties?
Yeah, I mean, totally. I thought it was. I mean, at first I was like, "Oh, he went to UCLA," and then I was like, "Oh no, he's a Vaultie."
By the way, I think Fallout actually came out before BioShock, at least the first Fallout game.
Did it?
I think it was 1997, and I think.
Oh, that would be true. BioShock was early 2000s.
Or 2007, I think, something like that.
Yeah. I guess BioShock concluded while Fallout was still being produced, which is why I thought it. Because there are only 3 BioShocks, I want to say 3 or 4. But yeah, it's a good point, because BioShock and Fallout, they share these armored, freak shows. They share, vulnerable kids, and they share this kind of like post-apocalyptic, separate society thing. Although I feel like, as much as Fallout seems happier than BioShock, it's definitely scariest.
Yeah.
BioShock just starts with horror.
I want to say I absolutely love also the whole aesthetic of this, the idea and this aesthetic of this, these people who are like trying to maintain this artificial sense of optimism and artificial sort of nostalgia for the past,
For America.
Yes. Like, our mutual friend, Devendra Hardawar, I think he put it best when he said that the Valtis are basically the story of like homeschoolers who, after they graduate and come out into the real world and have to face the real world, they're like,
yeah, there's something to that. Homeschools, even private schoolers, or
yeah,
that kind of thing. Which is interesting because on some level, the Brotherhood of Steel is similarly interested in the kind of restoration, but
right.
theirs is a kind of darker, more fundamentalist way of looking at things.
Right.
So
I think it's interesting that Lucy is well versed in the show in American history and ethics, which I'm wondering if that's going to play into future seasons, because I know that the video game side, Fallout's installments are set in cradles of American history, like Washington, D.C. and Boston after the fall. Mm-hmm. So you get to explore all of these iconic American touchstone locations in the sense of seeing them after Reconstruction, after the apocalypse. And I'm wondering if Lucy's knowledge of American history is going to play into that, and ethics also. Obviously, she's clearly ethically guided.
Yeah. Well, she it's interesting because she's reading War and Peace as a family book club book, which is all about French invasion of Russia, and it's quite while on one hand she's like in depth in those aspects, but she's also she says she's not a great shot, but she's quite fantastic with a gun.
Oh, she's so self-deprecating, right? She like is kicking ass in every single activity she does, and she's like, I dabble in this, I try this.
Oh, she's a Renaissance woman.
Totally. What's interesting about that scenario, and I love a montage. I think it's really important. I think it was good foundation. What they showed us there wasn't just Lucy saying, hey, I'm good at these things. It was basically her resume.
Yeah.
For why she would think she could survive out there. In the vault, she's the best of the best. And so when she leaves the vault, she's not, as much as her eyes are big and wide, and she speaks with a happy tone, and she's got this like super vulnerability kind of vibe compared to the kind of like cracked and salted denizens of the waste. She's prepared, right? So she has an education, she has the physical ability to defend herself, she's got some weapons, although they seem a little less useful out there. And whether she has to pick up a sword and fence or shoot a rifle, we shouldn't be super surprised if she can do it. Although Tosa, one of the things that gets me as you describe it is that she kind of also comes across as a kind of like Ubermensch, superhuman, right?
It's setting her up, as you noted, for being successful and being a survivor in this outside world, but it's also showing her various skill traits and stats, so to speak, in video game terminology, that she has going into this whole scenario.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Which I think will make it a bit more grounded and believable for folks when they see her survive things that most others may not. You notice that, especially in sort of the fight where there's quite a lot of people who are just like a bit inept and surprised.
Yes, like when the council members are hiding.
Yeah, when they're hiding, when people are still bringing out Jell-O.
Yes, and they get shot. Can you guys? I mean, this is not my forte, but can you guys talk a little bit about the gore, the violence, and sort of what like we've talked about things like Suicide Squad or whatever, and like the use of gore. Like, why is that? why would that be attractive to the showrunners to show off as opposed to just like a shot and like blood coming out or whatever?
I gotta say, I was kind of surprised at how gory it was, but I think it's in keeping with the as like you suggest with Suicide Squad. I think it's in keeping with the black comic tone of the show, because the show is doing this balance between grounded adventure and also dark comedy. And I think like when we see the really gory stuff, it's during this really darkly comic fight sequence where you've got this incongruity between the Raiders and the Vaulties. So I think it's just trying to also demonstrate how ruthless the Raiders are and what a culture shock it is to these Vaulties who have never seen a fist fight in their lives.
So it's funny because one of the things I think of is the movie Watchmen,
Okay.
as well as even a little bit of the TV series Watchmen, where but in the TV series it's more like an accent mark to the whole show.
Sure.
While in the movies it's kind of this it's kind of this blow to one, like the movie Watchmen, not necessarily dark comedy. There are elements there, but it's really to kind of make it feel more realistic, so to speak. Make it feel more brutal. There's a lot of brutal intentionality to it. There's a lot of making the Raiders feel like they are bad individuals, like they are only out there, they are the enemy. While I think we'll probably learn that there's probably some complexity to them and others. I think part of the series, I believe, is going to be a lot of self-discovery and actualization, that the folks in the vaults weren't all cracked up to be, but also the folks outside are, a mix of positives and negatives, and aren't just these all external things of fear. And I think we'll talk about that more when we get into sort of the big picture.
Yeah, I buy that. Andy, talk to me a little bit about sperm count. And let me buttress that when you're done.
So interesting, as part of what's interesting about shows like this is that you see this world building that they thankfully don't give you like a very didactic exposition. You get it all like elliptically, which is wonderful. Like this beautiful, it's just exactly the way a show like this should be written. So when you're learning about the world, you get the sense that living in a vault within a closed system has its you need genetic diversity, and so different value systems come into play. So instead of like potential partners being looking for a potential partner that can give you financial security, your potential partner has to have good sperm count, or is healthy, or like can potentially perpetuate the species beyond your generation. So I think it's really interesting to see stuff like that when you had like Lucy asking the guy Monty what his sperm count is, and her friend was like looking at him like, yeah, that's right, you tell me what it is. Like she's she's very judgy.
Yeah, well, also
the friend was great.
So Stephanie, she's fantastic. I hope we see more of her as the show goes on. I think we will. I love the conversation she had with Stephanie, because Lucy by herself, right?
Yeah.
Her name means light. McLean means son of a handsome man. Kyle MacLachlan is her father. He's an actor known for being as comedic as he is handsome. So like she's an open book, right? You know exactly what she is. It's only when she starts talking to Stephanie that you kind of get some of the stuff that may not be on the surface of the world, but just underneath it. So she's talking to Stephanie openly about the fact that, she's marriage age. Let's put her at 20 or, something like that.
Yeah.
And, she's reading books like War and Peace, which presumably means she's read about other books that have like, adults in it doing adult things. And so, what is a late teen, early 20s kind of want? And part of it is maybe not romance, but just, sex.
Yeah.
And whether it's the sperm count, like she knows what she's supposed to use sex for, but she also knows that like she's got urges, and other young people in the space have urges too. And since she's related to everybody, it doesn't get in the way of her urges. So she's literally like, hooking up with my cousin is fine, but I can't have a baby with him.
Right.
And like you said, Andy, because they have all the food they need, and they have all the shelter they need, and they have all the activities they need, the only thing she really needs from a guy in terms of like long-term, relationship stuff is his ability to help her like have a kid. And she wants to have a kid so that just like, her happy relationship with her father, she could perpetuate that. And she, fulfill her duty as an active participant of her community. So I thought it was really interesting how sex was de-tabooed almost.
Sure.
Right? And that, you don't think of that when you think of a wholesome society the way we see in The Vault. But if you jump back to, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, in a world where people were produced on a factory line,
right,
and sex was just an urge, the women in that story, along with the men, they had it whenever they wanted to, not trying to get pregnant, but they had it for the same kinds of reasons. They're young and, they feel the urge and they just do it. And there's no like real consequences of it. You can imagine that things like gonorrhea are not really running through the vault system.
Right.
Because it's such a closed loop.
Exactly.
So that to me was pretty incredible. And when we kind of like move that forward, when her new husband, Monty, is ready to hook up with her, she doesn't have, like they make it's kind of like a weird play on that sort of like, first time that someone's with their husband in most movies, right? Because she's effectively a princess,
right?
And he's effectively the guy who's supposed to like, get with the princess. And instead of it kind of being like, you watch Bridgerton, there's like the gentle caress as the wedding dress comes off, and you're like, oh, what's gonna happen?
Right.
And this is like, oh, okay, you're naked. I'm just going to get my underpants off, jump on top of you, and do what we got to do because I want these babies, right?
Okie dokie.
Exactly. And it wasn't taboo. It wasn't like, it didn't need to be explicit to be explicit, right? The sex is explicit. They were having sex. It wasn't hidden. But it wasn't explicit in terms of like, we need to like, show fluids and shit. Right. And that was, to me, really interesting. What was also really interesting is that on some level, she's wearing this white, like when she walks out to the wedding, she's wearing this white dress. Her father's like very happy.
Yeah.
Everyone's there for her. It's her kind of like coming out moment. And you think of like the white dress as like, she's moving into like the next phase of her life. She's like this young, now she's not a virgin, but almost virginal thing. And then by the end of that scene, the dress is torn. There's blood on it close to her middle, like kind of where her womb would be, right? And you kind of like see, and that's like this wonderful symbol of the innocence having been ripped from her. So she's in the white dress, the symbol of virginity. She's been basically tricked into copulating with someone, which is terrible. And then that person attempted to like kill her, and she had to then kill her husband, within the same 15 minutes of like receiving his donation to her possible baby. Right. And then
try to kill him. Yes.
Right. Try to kill him. She started it. Her dad finished it. But then there's also the fact that she's like out there, pulling the trigger of guns and like taking people out, as basically a hardened warrior while she's still in the trappings of, her wedding dress. And I thought that was a beautiful way of showing that she's kind of like come into her own even before she left the vault. And for me, that was we were talking about Foundation, Tosin, when you were talking about the scenes where she was showing how she's like a good shot and she can like fight and everything like that. That scene, that visual built on the Foundation for me when she was saying, I'm ready to leave the vault, right? I'm ready to go and find my father because I've seen people as bad as they could be and I've dealt with them. And now I'm going to get my daddy back. And I thought that was just pretty powerful. And we've seen like, you've got characters like her and you've got characters like the bride in Kill Bill, which are kind of similar. Like she's in her wedding dress when she gets shot and she's almost killed.
Yeah.
And later on we can talk about characters like the gunslinger, but that kind of like trope brought into something as new and different as Fallout really grounded it for me. So that was pretty powerful for me.
Also I think Ready or Not that also had a bride as well.
Oh yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
Ready or Not, exactly.
Yeah, just kind of going through the house, mowing down. I think one thing that was really interesting was there was this moment where Lucy is getting ready for her wedding. She's in that dress, and they have this shot where she's like juxtaposed with it's a weapon box, but you only see part of the weapon, and it says she gives this look where she's like unsure of her future, and you see in that same shot the text that says "break glass," and of course off screen, it's like in case of trouble. I think it's around 10 minutes in, and it was just really, I found it just super poetic of the steps that happened later, and it seemed like she was like uncertain, is this really the direction she wanted? She decides to go through with it because things look beautiful in this projected world, right, in this 3D world that is being put on screen visually in front of her. But once the reality that's in her face becomes this bloody war and fight and people that she knows get killed and explosions where she's protected from the glass. She's on the other side of the explosion, kind of a juxtaposition from the beginning, right, where we have both the father and daughter on the same side of the glass absorbing the blow. On this other side, she's now protected by her father. And so I think all of those just really poignant imagery and kind of really further backs her certainty to go on this quest, right? That same weapon that was in the box, she grabs a different one, not the same one, but it's still representative of her breaking that glass, taking control of her own destiny.
Right. And also consummating her marriage was the figurative loss of innocence and also the loss of innocence of her character in relation to where she's moving forward after that point in her place in society.
Yeah. I mean that moment when she realized she was effectively like sexually assaulted.
Right.
And she's like, I have to kill him now.
Yes.
I mean, it's incredible.
On lighter fare, when we see the jealous scene and we see Zach Cherry's character, who you may recognize from Severance, can he ever not be stuck in a world where he's where part of him is kind of stuck in a silo-esque place where he has fears of leaving to go outside?
It's his role.
He's like the perfect guy for this.
I mean, he was great because he was like sentimental, but he also like she did and like Stephanie did, he understood that what they were doing wasn't like the real thing.
Right.
And he understood why she had to do it. And he like took direction from her. Okay, our relationship has changed. Let me open the gate, that kind of thing. And that was huge. It was great to see that dynamic. And when he lets her out of the vault, he also realizes that he's kind of like lost whatever they had together. But he does have a place in her life, right? Like, it's not like they broke up like in a normal show and they're no longer like people. She's like, you're still my cousin.
You're talking about, her cousin, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that was pretty great. So I don't know. I think that for me, that's mostly it when it comes to the salient points, except for, let's talk about these risk gizmos, right? They're called PIP boys. PIP is an acronym standing for Personal Information Processor. They're like wearable Star Trek tricorders mobile phones, but they're more than that. Because Tosin, what was her brother doing with it?
There was a lot of nods, of course, to the game, and this is a callback to the game, but also a game that I loved playing, or I played quite a bit growing up when we didn't have as many sophisticated around there. So her brother, instead of being part of the book club, reading War and Peace, is playing Atomic Command / Missile Command, which is an actual game where you try and stop missiles from blowing up your buildings, essentially.
I remember
Which is
that.
great considering the beginning. Yeah.
Kind of a really dark game to give a underground post-apocalyptic survivor to play.
Especially because he's a survivor because all the buildings did get hit with missiles.
Yes.
But he also does have that sort of quirky sense of humor. So
yeah, so
it does kind of make sense.
He's the counterculture, right? So like this is what's so cool for a game. At least back in 1990, the late 1990s when this game came out, gamers were counterculture. Now we're obviously mainstream because we have television shows about our games, but he represents on some level us as counterculture. So whereas Lucy and her father are the most in you can get, he's the overseer, he's the leader, and she's his like perfect daughter. He's not so much. I mean, he's kind of black sheepy, but at the same time, it's not because he doesn't, he's a fool or anything like that. He's a bright guy. He's bright enough to recognize that, maybe the book club isn't for me. I can play this game, or I can sneer here and there, and I don't, I'm just looking for a different world. But he loves his family, and he's totally just kind of like not into following the mainstream. And I think that's something that, you get from the Last of Us, because Ellie is clearly not in the mainstream. Yeah. Right. And you also get this kind of not in the mainstream vibe from Maximus, who we haven't talked about very much, when he's getting kind of his ass beat by his fellow initiates or acolytes, or I forgot what they were called, in the Brotherhood of Steel. And it's only his friend Dane who gets him. Yes. Right.
Talk to me a little bit about Maximus's dynamic, because to me it felt like, this is what I'm sorry I didn't really get into a lot about the Brotherhood and their aspirants, but it was a pretty straightforward story. But the one thing that sort of I'm trying to crack into is Maximus's motivation, because he seems like a guy who who definitely wants to be a someone who upholds the values of the Brotherhood of Steel, but it has internal conflict about feeling competent enough to do that.
Right. I mean, there's this. You see him saying, I believe in this. You took me in, you fed me, you did all these things, and now I believe in you. But you also see where he's in class, and they ask him, what's the purpose, and he doesn't get the answer right. Right. And somebody else does. So, it's like he has the will, but he hasn't really put in the work. He's not quite the same. He's not quite a mirror of Lucy, right? Whereas Lucy has done all the work, so she's kind of like perfect in every way. He's clearly imperfect, and he's also the guy. He's getting beat up at school, so to speak. And he comes from nothing because he was picked up by those guys in order to join them. They seem to go around finding orphans, which probably there's no short supply of in a post-apocalyptic world 219 years after the destruction of civilization. So he's kind of like very much a mirror of Lucy. And I feel like in this episode, we got a lot of Lucy and just enough of him to understand that he was going to make it out there. So you have this like three-pronged, plot A, plot B, plot C story going with the ghoul we just learned about, Maximus, and then of course Lucy on top.
Yeah.
You know,
Did he remind you a little bit of John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men?
a little bit of Mice and Men, and a little bit of Jon Snowish kind of stuff
Oh yeah. Jon
from A Song of
Snow.
Ice and Fire or Game of Thrones.
Totally, I can see that.
Reluctant hero. And I'm hoping that in the next episode we might see a little bit more of his situation. But yeah, I feel like the big thing there was to have us recognize what the Brotherhood of Steel was, and they had that interesting way. So whereas in Lucy's world they've got their gizmo in their hand,
Yeah.
in the Brotherhood of Steel's world they've got incredible mechanized hardware, and they've got these like James Cameron level like helicopter thingies, and they've even got an airship.
Who's funding that, by the way?
What?
Who's funding that? Like we see,
right? So that's a big story. Like, what are the resources behind this incredible mechanization? But also, when it comes with all this incredible mechanization, when it's time for them to get the description of the scientist, they're doing paint by numbers.
Yeah, it's like it's like a game of Battleship. Like they're calling out numbers on a grid, and then you get the thing. And it's like this rough pixelated illustration. It's really weird.
Which is crude but totally effective because you recognize the guy there. So I feel like
I wonder if that's one of those things like we've seen with the 2004 Battlestar Galactica, where they've dumbed down the tech in order to avoid an attack from
the techno-babble stuff.
Yeah.
I think that you might be exactly right, Andy, because what they did there was like we all have seen mechanized transportation stuff. I mean, our entire adulthood has been wars, and video game people have seen all this stuff before. So it's like we don't need like a super glitzy situation. We need something reliable, and we need something right there. We need something that's gonna work in the moment, and that's all that stuff. So I guess that's why they were doing it that way. But at the same time, you can see where they put their energy, and their energy is very much in the in like moving these gigantic mechanized dudes around to go do whatever they're supposed to do. In this case, find a scientist, and we don't really know why. So
any other salient points to talk about before we move on?
Just one plot point.
Yeah.
Why did the bad guy Lee Moldaver seem to know her dad, and why did she take him?
Yeah, it seemed like to me like Lee Moldaver knew Lucy's mom, but her dad was familiar with her. She's like, I think what did he say? Like, I think I know who you are.
Right. And
So
it makes you wonder,
implies
is her mom out there? Did she really die? It's
right.
That kind of
It
thing.
implies to me that he did not know her directly, but her mom, she definitely knew Lucy's mom directly.
And it's going to be very. I like a good mystery. We've got to figure out what Lucy's parentage is and what's going on. Speaking of mysteries, what are our questions? Our unanswered questions?
So I've got a few unanswered questions. I'm really curious about. Usually like in a movie, when you see a woman throwing up, you immediately know that's like a narrative shorthand for she's pregnant.
Chekhov's gun for pregnancy.
Exactly. So we did not see Lucy throw up, but we did see them consummate their union with Monty. So I'm curious whether or not she's going to get pregnant from that.
I want to throw two facts out there as people think about this. The first fact is Lucy's like, my reproductive organs are in great shape. Which means she's like young and, she's got a lot of fecundity going on. She's fertile, etc. The second thing, though, is right after the intercourse, when she points her pip at the dude, the radiation spikes like crazy.
Yeah.
Right. So, it's a TV show. It's a video game, and there are obviously people on the planet that have been reproducing for 219 years. But it could very well be that this scarred and broken man that she had to, break the jaw and her father had to finish off, didn't have what it took to to reproduce. So I wouldn't be surprised if she isn't, but I think even just the worry and the scare and the emotions that come with saying, okay, I've always wanted a baby, I didn't want it with him, how do I deal with this?
Right.
Even if it doesn't actually become a pregnancy, just exploring that emotional situation from someone who's normally so confident of herself could be a lot of gold for this series.
For sure.
The only counterpoint to that is that, you do see her like stitching herself back together from
so many ways
where
a pregnancy would have failed. Yeah.
Yeah, and she's sort of also like mentally stitching herself back together for this journey ahead of her, and so that's the only counterpoint there. But
it's even staples. It's not just stitching. She like stapled egg jammy.
Oh yeah, she's yeah. So I mean, we'll see. That is another thing, bringing a child into the world and all that. But I kind of hope we don't go that direction, at least for a few seasons. I'd like to really explore the world rather than explore the meaning of, bringing youth in and us to sit with these characters rather than sit with a +1.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the stand-in there is Stephanie, right? She's about to have a baby.
Right.
She survived.
Albeit
one eye less. So, they don't that in that situation, they could explore some of that with Stephanie having the baby, without having to have Lucy have a baby. But I do think that whether a baby shows up or not, whatever option she has, however she figures it out, I think that some of those things would be interesting to see a character like her deal with. Andy, what's your next question?
Yeah, so in the bigger world building, I'm kind of interested in this concept of Eden, this concept of the Brotherhood of Steel's ideal world. Like, what are they fighting for? We heard it mentioned in the discussion with the elder cleric, but and I don't know if we'll actually get it answered this season. What I feel confident that we will get answered is they also mentioned that this target escaped from the Enclave, and I have a feeling that we're going to find out what that Enclave is, because we've heard it mentioned twice in this episode. So
it represents another society, right? So there's the Vault Society, the Enclave Society, and the Brotherhood Society. These are like the structured societies, and then you have the wider unstructured expanse of the wasteland. So it'll be interesting to see the Enclave, because each of the three structured societies is effectively a faction, and it's about their conflict. That's what the show's going to be about, their conflict. So I'm interested in seeing how that all works. And as for the Brotherhood's ideal world, so I have to assume that they want to reconstruct certain aspects of the previous world. That's why they want this technology and stuff. But also, the whole Brotherhood is positively medieval, right? I mean, or like early Renaissance. It's knights and squires and clerics. It's a theocracy. They get orphans and they indoctrinate them into their philosophy in a world where there is not a lot going on, and yet, these orphans get food and they get shelter.
Wait, you're not super excited about brick ball? Or
well, come on.
So the best part about brick ball is, I don't know if you guys have read The Handmaid's Tale. There's a follow-up called The Testaments. And in The Testaments, it takes place like 100 years later or something, maybe 300 years later. And they're trying to deconstruct, in part of it, what happened during The Handmaid's Tale, what happened during the time of Gilead. And they're getting it wrong, which is one of the reasons why the book is so fantastic, won the Booker Prize. Margaret Atwood showing how historians get things wrong. And when they're throwing, first of all, bricks are difficult to make, right? In a world that doesn't have the kind of energy, but whatever. They've got the hoop, or, the hoop is up and the backboard is up, but they have the backboard backwards. So they're throwing the brick at the backboard, trying to get it over into the hoop, which is one of those things, like in 200 years, because of the lack of like straight up transfer of information from one generation to another, because of the break. They are totally doing it totally backwards compared to us. It's just the brick is going toward they have to get over the backboard. I guess someone thought it was too easy to throw the brick into the hoop and use the backboard. I don't know. So how do you feel like the Brotherhood's Final Four is going to shape up?
Yeah, we'll see who can dunk first. And then...
Exactly. Well, I don't want a brick on your head. That gives a whole new meaning to like
hilarious.
You laid up a brick. Don't dunk that brick on me.
Man. What is sad between that and the latrines? Some pretty sad technology there.
The animated flies around the latrine. Like my skin was crawling with the animated flies. But speaking of the animated flies, the technical aspects of this show are fantastic.
Yes. So let's talk about the technical aspects. This is where we talk about some of the behind the scenes elements we enjoyed in this episode, like music and acting and visual effects, etc. I want to give a shout out to a veteran actress, Leslie Uggams, who is one of the Vaulties, and then Zach Cherry, who we mentioned before, whom we've seen in Severance. It's great to see them again. It's great to see Michael Christopher, who played the elder cleric. I know him as Philip Price from Mr. Robot, and that man was like just a constant presence in that show. So it's fantastic to see him and his sonorous voice. I mean, that man adds gravitas to like any situation. At the end of the episode, one of the guys that digs up the ghoul, Honcho, that's Michael T. Williamson, who is Bubba from Forrest Gump. It was nice to see him.
Oh,
yeah.
I recognized him. That's been 30 years since I've seen that guy on screen. And that whole thing was weird. I loved it, but it was like, it's introduced to badass. He kills everybody.
Yeah.
But it was like, why did you kill everybody? To just pick up their job.
I'm curious about what that environment was too, because that was the only. I feel like we got the world building element of the Vault, and we got the world building of the Brotherhood of Steel, but I don't really know what's going on with with that sort of that neo-Western situation, whatever that is.
Right. It's also like in our first preview episode, I was like, how does that guy survive? And now we know.
Yes. Drugs. Ramin Djawadi did the score, and it's truly a delight. I love the theme that he has for the ghoul, which feels very much like the Man in Black theme from Westworld that he also did.
Yes.
And I want to say that I really love that this is a carryover from the video game franchise, is all of the mid-century pop standards that they have, that they use, appropriately to counterpoint scenes here are just fantastic. I just want more of that. Gotcha.
Now, you just mentioned the Man in Black, and I just feel like it's the perfect time to talk about the big picture of this episode.
Yes.
So, the last time we met up with Nolan, there was a Man in Black, and the Man in Black was William. In this case, it's Cooper. But I just got to say, they're both men with a past, right? Mm-hmm. They're both men with a happy past, like a family life past. They're unrecognizable today. They're these long-lived, unrecognizable people who've become gunslingers, like known for their violence, and who are sort of like preternaturally unstoppable.
Yep.
And it's like this archetype has just kind of shown up twice in a row now, albeit differently. And I don't know what you guys think about that. Did we see enough of this in Westworld? Like, why are we seeing it again? Or, how do you feel about it?
I think it's really interesting to see some of the similarities between Westworld. Like, you've got the Man in Black, you've got these very special, stylized, enclosed environments.
Lucy was definitely on a loop.
Yes. Like, all of the Vaulties are in their own like little loops, just repeating that. Even that wonderful montage of them cleaning up. Where they're carrying the bodies to the compost, and they're literally whitewashing the chaos off the walls. They're trying to like restore the vault back to a sense of normalcy, even in defiance of reality. Like things actually happened in this vault. People were killed, blood was shed, but
we have to move on, Andy.
But you have to keep your head, right?
Even though exactly.
Some people lost their heads, based off that poster. So, yeah.
I do want to understand like the long-term mental health problems in the vault, because I want to see more of what happens in the vault with the various characters that are in there, because they just went through the most traumatizing thing that's happened to them in 200 plus years.
So let's talk about some other big picture things. We already talked about the comparison of this show to other video game adaptations that we've seen. But let me ask you guys what you think this is the secret sauce that puts this above most other attempts so far that you've seen, or puts it above stuff like Halo or Twisted Metal.
So I haven't seen Twisted Metal, so I can't speak towards that. I have seen a bit of Halo, and I think one portion could be the source. For me, Halo's always been a very complex and convoluted story.
Yeah.
So even the games themselves are not as straightforward after like the first ones, and can be a bit difficult to follow, and there's so much literature around it, so that makes it tough. I think right now one of the things that is well done in this first episode is we have the pieces of the story, and they're all, as Dwayne described it, fairly well laid out for folks who aren't familiar with things. So that on itself is kind of a step up based off of some of the other things that you've seen in the past.
Yeah, the big difference for me is that I feel like Master Chief is a character that you're supposed to interplay a lot more. So when it comes to the last 22 years, Master Chief hasn't said a damn word in the game, and it's a first-person shooter. So you are Master Chief. And where Lucy, and to some lesser extent, Maximus are stand-ins for characters, the characters presented on the screen are strong enough for you to know that you're not them, right? This is definitely Lucy's story. Whereas when Pablo Schreiber becomes Master Chief, you've had a 20-something year relationship with being actually Master Chief. It's kind of like, okay, all right, I'll watch it, but you may not be as emotionally connected. I want Maximus to win, right? I want him to earn becoming a knight. I want to see him upgrade himself. I want to see what's going to happen with Lucy, and we talked about the pregnancy thing possibly. I want to see her find her dad. I want to see what happens with her mom. You want to see what's going to happen with them. These characters are walking through a universe that you've known, but you don't have to pretend to. You don't have to like have the conflict of being with them, and I think that's much more powerful. When you get to Ellie in The Last of Us, Ellie was an established character, and in The Last of Us, they tell you what to do, what she needs to do.
Yeah.
But her actual vocalizations and everything have established her so that when we meet her in the TV show, we're getting to know Ellie again, and she's just like or better or more dynamic than she was. But I think that Master Chief is a little – I see why people are annoyed with Halo because, as a first-person shooter, it really was – it wasn't a character drama, as much.
I think I think my opinion about this, and I'll keep this brief, is that it goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of the episode about how the showrunners had Jonathan Nolan to shepherd their vision through the production. And I think if you're comparing The Last of Us to Fallout, with The Last of Us, you have a complete narrative from start to finish. You have a fully fleshed out story, and it works. So if you got something that works, you don't mess with it. You just basically adapt it as is. Whereas Fallout, what you have is a collection of world building, a collection of elements, a collection of aesthetics, but there's no necessarily like one single narrative story that runs through any of these games. It's because of the nature of the game itself, because it's a role-playing game and you can just wander from place to place and accomplish different things. And so when you've got that to work with, you want to avoid trying to directly adapt that game. You want to do what they did and
capture the essence and then do your own thing.
Exactly. Capture the essence, but create your own narrative that runs through that world. And I think that to me is they got it right.
I buy that. I also think that one of the things that moved me here was, like you said, they captured the essence, but they needed a story. And one of the things that we see in the story is this whole lost fathers and lost daughters situation. So in the beginning, you've got Cooper, and he's got his daughter. And by the time you recognize that Cooper has become a ghoul, you see that he's lost his daughter, right? Like his daughter's not with him. Whereas with Lucy, you see that she's with her father, and then the father is taken from Lucy. And so she's out there looking for her father, and it's unclear what Cooper is out there for. They just revived him. He's going to go see what he can do. But it's been hundreds of years since we last saw his daughter. So it's unclear if he's alive. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some flashbacks to understand what happened there. So I'm looking forward to this lost fathers and daughters situation. I also feel like we're going to see a little bit of the haves and have-nots, right? So when it came to the explosions in the beginning of the show, we're at this very fancy birthday party. They've hired an actor who has his own TV show to do like stunts or whatever. They're overlooking Hollywood. And as the chaos unfolds, people just start running, right? They're going to go wherever they can. The wealthy family with that house, they've already got their bomb shelter. And what seems to be one of the guy's good friends, he's like, I don't have time for you. Get out of here. We don't have space for you. So there's haves and have-nots. Then you get to the vault, and clearly the vault people are the haves. They've got everything. They never had to leave for 200 years. They're self-sustaining a vault. And then you have these raiders come in, and their bodies are scarred and broken, and all they seek is destruction. But as Tosin said, we're probably going to see some more sympathetic looks at the raiders and why they're doing what they're doing. And part of that's because they're struggling out there while people are living relatively cushily inside the vault. So there's going to be this haves and have-not thing. And then you've got the haves and have-nots of the Brotherhood of Steel, right? So you've got these clerics who live, they're clearly like respected and everything. And then you've got people like Maximus who are dealing with latrines and getting their ass beat all the time. And then you've got the knights, which you don't really know about. But clearly he wants to be the knight. So the haves versus the have-nots, right? So it's going to be, I think that's a big piece of it.
One other big picture idea that I touched upon earlier was this fear of the outside, fear of the other. And so I really see that as a theme that will be explored. We see it even from the very first scene where, our main character who becomes, essentially the ghoul, or perhaps he's the ghoul, is, shying away from these other folks. He's kind of a cowboy in a strange world. To throughout the course of this episode and even the end, right? And so there's this question of whether or not that fear is justified, whether or not, you get kicked down, you get killed and abused, everyone's untrustworthy, or there are folks in there that care about one another and folks in there who are good on some side. So we'll find that out as these three characters supposedly intertwine as they're chasing after a guy and his dog.
Oh, so that's a good segue. So the resident cricket in my studio is telling me it's time to wrap this up. So let's finish with one more segment here, which is ephemera. And these are links and extra textual connections that will help you enhance the enjoyment of the episode. Just stuff outside of this property that we feel are relevant to this conversation. And I want to point out two particular pieces of media here. And one is a 1975 film called A Boy and His Dog, which is based on a Harland Ellison novella. And tell me if you find that you think this synopsis sounds a little familiar. This movie is about travelers in a post-apocalyptic wasteland who encounter an underground shelter with a society living in a bizarre caricature of mid-century America. This movie is actually in the public domain, I believe. So it's you can watch it on YouTube, and it's really interesting. Stars John Johnson, and he's the boy of the title, and he's got a dog companion. So I think we also have a target who has a dog companion in this show. So, and the other thing I want to mention is a book called A Canticle for Leibowitz, written by Walter M. Miller Jr. And again, tell me if this sounds familiar to you. After the apocalypse, a monastic order strives to preserve pre-war artifacts whose purpose even they don't understand. It feels like these two pieces of media are really like in conversation with this story, the way it's been built out. But they're both absolutely worth checking out. Boy and His Dog, Canticle for Leibowitz. I think we've got another reference, don't we?
Oh,
Yeah,
Mice and Men,
so
yeah.
Of Mice and Men, I called that out earlier. It's a 1937 book by John Steinbeck, but one of the reasons I called it out is it's about the experiences of two characters, George Milton and Lennie Smalls, who are displaced migrant ranch workers who move from place to place in California in search of new job opportunities during the Great Depression in the United States. So I think some of the characterizations remind me of folks like Lennie and George and of Mice and Men, but also when you think about these sort of displaced individuals trying to seek opportunity in what was seen as kind of the fallout of the United States during the Great Depression. I think there's some overlap in places here. So.
All right, well, that is going to do it for this episode of Vault 33. I'm going to go around the table here and I'm going to ask, where can people find your work on the internet when you're not talking about Fallout on Prime? Dwayne?
Check me out on Twitter at Dwayne D, or X as they call it today.
Tosin?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at BurntToast45, where I mainly post photos. I think I'm going to start getting into street photography very soon.
Nice. Nice. I support that. My X handle is Mr. Babyman. I don't post much on there, but I will definitely be posting about promoting this show.
Talk about Fallout. You know?
Yes,
X.
Fallout. Yeah, really. Our Twitter handle is Fallout Vault 33. We're on all major podcast distribution networks, so add us, tell your friends, and join us next time when we cover the second episode of Fallout, which is called The Target. Until then, please tweet us and leave a comment on iTunes, and we'll see you guys next time.
All right. Thanks, guys. And thanks, Cricket.
Why don't you crawl out to the fallout back to me?